During Lent, we did a series called Rector and Friends, where I interviewed various people to talk, asking them about how they came to faith and what they were particularly passionate about. I've done an interview now with Bishop Paul, where I asked the same questions and also asked him to talk to us about the Darson Rule of Life. You can hear this interview now here and also on our other social media sites. Good morning, Bishop. It's great to see you here. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us and telling us a little bit about
David, it's lovely to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Good. So first of all, we really just wanted to find out a little bit background about you. Could you tell us a little bit about your background, some family? Were you brought up in a Christian home, a church-going family, or was that not the case?
It's a great question. Yeah, I'm one of those peculiar things. I'm a church warden's son. So I was an only child. I was born in Bradford in Yorkshire, and the local church, it was an evangelical Anglican church, and my dad was church warden there. And I sang in a choir. The last time before I got this job that I was able to wear a silver medal round my neck was when I was the head boy in the choir. And that was where I was as a young child. And then as a teenager in the 1960s, as a lot of people did, I wandered away from the faith, and I was caught up in the only bookshop in Bradford, which is where I was brought up, was W.H. Smith's, and they had a short kind of shelf of religious and spiritual books, and there was some about Buddhism and Taoism. That was all very exotic at the time, and I was very interested in all that. So I felt as if I'd leave my Christian roots behind, and so when I was about 15 or 16. That's what I did. My parents just kept on praying for me. They knew how to deal with teenagers, so they basically cut me some slack. And then when I went to university, my mother wasn't very well, and so there was a lot of stress in my life, and I had a bit of a breakdown when I was at university. And as part of that, I was beginning to look in a very serious way about what made sense of life. And some of my friends there at the university, and indeed one or two of the teachers, were Christians. And these were very bright people. And when you're a teenager, you think you're the smartest in the world. But even I could recognize that a couple of them were professors of theology, lovely people, but very bright. And I thought, if these guys are still Christians, there must be something more in this. And so I came into the faith on my own terms. Mm-hmm. You may know he's passed away now, but the famous Russian Orthodox bishop, Metropolitan Antony Bloom, who wrote a lot of books 20 odd years ago now. But he said, God has children, but no grandchildren. In other words, you can't be a Christian just because your dad was one. And so I came to accept Christ for myself when I was at university, and I'm 67 now, David, and Jesus has been in my life ever since.
It's great to hear. And that's a great saying, isn't it? That really, that God only has children, no, not grandchildren.
Yeah.
Really important. Nice little soundbite.
Yeah.
So obviously you came to faith, and just how did you come to decide? You had obviously had a call to ordination. Was there some particular event, or was it just you suddenly, was it a blinding light thing or not?
Well, at the time I came to Christ, I was a drama student, and at university reading for a drama degree. And what I wanted to do with my life at that time was to go into the BBC and be a kind of director, TV director, and then I looked around. I had a year off after I got my drama degree, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I joined a Christian organisation in Birmingham called the St. Basil Centre, which was there in the inner city of Birmingham for homeless young people. And I worked for a year in the Bull Ring in Birmingham. It's not the one that's there now. It was the first Bull Ring, which was a pretty roughy-tufty place. And there was a little kiosk that the Bull Ring let the Basil Centre have. And I used to go there every day and chat to homeless young people, or people who were, quite often we'd have deserters from the army. They would have joined the army and then decided it wasn't for them, and so they ran away. And people like that would come to us in the kiosk. And I began to think that, there is more to life. I'm not knocking people who are in the entertainment industry, but for me, I just felt there's more to life than just making my own way. I can be there to help people. And then I thought, well, what kind of people do I want to help? It was great to be there with young people, but I thought, actually, if I went into the church's ministry, then I'd be able to connect with people at all different points in their lives, a bit like being a general practitioner in medicine. So I was living in Birmingham at the time, so I began to explore that. And at that same year, I got married to Kate. And for ordination, they accepted me for training, that I would stay in Birmingham. And I went to Queen's College in Birmingham, which is an ecumenical Methodist and Anglican college, with lots of opportunities in Birmingham for placements and being there for people in different parts of their need. And really, I've never looked back since then. So at that time, when I began exploring ordination training, I was 21. And I went to college for 3 years, and then I was ordained at the age of 24.
It's good to hear. Just moving forward now, whilst it would be great to hear about your complete faith journey to where you are now, but you've been Bishop of Liverpool for a few years. I can't remember now. Is it 5 years, 6 years?
Yeah, it's longer than that, mate. Time flies when you're having fun. It's 6 and a bit years.
6 and a bit years. Okay. So can you tell us what do you enjoy most about being the Bishop of Liverpool?
I mean, it is an astonishing privilege to be bishop here. A couple of jobs ago, I worked for the National Church of England. I was the national advisor for mission and evangelism. And at that time, I connected, when Bishop James was here, I connected with Liverpool Diocese. When you're a national advisor, you go around giving advice, and not every diocese takes your advice, but I'm glad to say that Liverpool did. And Mike Eastwood, our diocesan secretary, he was here then in those days too, and so I got a love for Liverpool and for the church in Liverpool as an advisor. And then after that, I went to be the Bishop of Hertford, which is an assistant bishop's job in St Albans Diocese, just north of London. And then they got in touch with me and they said, would you be interested in being interviewed? Because now, of course, if you go for a bishop's job, they interview you. Would you be interested in being interviewed to be the Bishop of Liverpool? And I was bowled over. I thought Bishop James was great. And actually, it was Bishop James who gave me my job in that national job. He chaired the group that appointed me there. So I always thought Liverpool was too big for me. So when they offered me the opportunity to be interviewed for it, I bit their hands off for it. Because this is a diocese, there's a lot of need here, but also there's a long tradition of people who want to share the gospel and who want to see justice done. And those two things were the two things that mattered to me. So I went to Bishop Thorpe. I was interviewed for the job by the Archbishop of York, Archbishop Sentamu, and by a group including, of course, people from the diocese, including Maggie Swinson, actually, and a bunch of other people. And I was interviewed on April Fool's Day, which a lot of people in the diocese might say explains a lot, actually. But on the 2nd of April, the Archbishop of York rang me up to say that they would like me to come here. And I've never looked back. It's always been the most extraordinary privilege to be the bishop here.
Mm. And it gives you opportunity to develop some of your passions that you've just been talking about, social justice issues and
yeah, I mean, it was, you stand on giants' shoulders when you're the Bishop of Liverpool. So Bishop David Shepherd, of course, was instrumental in writing that report, Faith in the City, which really set the marker for the Church of England in the way that it should be there for the poor. And both Bishop David and then Bishop James were great preachers of the gospel. And so when I came, those two things Jesus and justice. Those two things were in the DNA of the diocese. And so, together with colleagues, we thought, how can we say that in a new way for our generation? And in the end, we came into land on talking about wanting to ask God for a bigger church to make a bigger difference. So the bigger church and the bigger difference, evangelism and justice, and to hold those two things together. And in some dioceses, it would take 10 years to persuade people that that's what the priorities should be. But here in Liverpool, those have been the priorities for such a long time that people could get with that very quickly and very easily.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you then, following on from that, how did you come to formulate the rule of life? How did that develop into that?
So we at the time, this was some years ago now. So it was when Archdeacon Peter and Archdeacon Ricky were here, and Bishop Richard, and we talked together about what we should do. And a number of other dioceses across the church were exploring this thing about a rule of life. How can you do something that will actually work for people in all their different situations in life, but that will point them towards the gospel? And over 3 meetings of our diocesan synod, which is quite a large group, but I put out suggestions about how we might want to do this, and comments came back, and then we thought about it again, then we came back a few months later. And after 3 of those synods, we had polished this up, and my task was, and I said this to Father Richard Pears, who at the time was our Director of Education, I said, we want something that someone with a doctorate in theology could understand, but also something that an infant, a child in one of our infant schools can understand as to how you should live your life. And so we just chose a number of small words. And it was Archdeacon Ricky who said, why don't we talk about being called and being sent? God calls us and God sends us. So calling is an inner journey, and being sent is an outer journey. So that was where it started. And then we thought, well, what is it that we're being called to, and what is it that we're being sent to do? And how can we say that really simply? And after these 3 times around the houses with the synod, we came into land on what we've got now, which is that we're called to pray and read and learn, and we're sent to tell and serve and give. And we felt that those 6 words covered, you can take them all kinds of different ways, but they cover what it is to be a Christian disciple. And it's not churchy. People in their walks of life in the world can change the world if they live their lives as Christians by that inner and outer journey. So that's where it all came from, and I'm delighted to say that the people have got on board with it.
Yeah, it's great. So if you could sort of expand a little more and tell us 1 or 2 things about each individual of the tell, serve, give, and so on, really, that you've just explained about, that would be great to hear.
Yeah, that would be a pleasure. So if you're called by God, you're called to shape your life in following Jesus. And we felt there were 3 dimensions to that. So prayer is such a simple thing, but also it can be so rich. But a lot of people think, oh gosh, prayer, that's too complicated for me. So when I began to talk about the life of prayer, this is how I put it, David. I said, in the diocese, broadly speaking, there are 20,000 people who go to church on Sundays and in the week, and there are 33,000 children in our Church of England schools, if you add them all up. And every one of those people, whatever else they might know about the Christian life, almost all of them will know the Lord's Prayer. And so I began by saying, if you do nothing else, say the Lord's Prayer. Say it every day. I said, don't say it twice. Don't feel this is one more thing, this rule of life. But whenever you do say the Lord's Prayer, think about those 50-odd thousand people in the diocese who'll be saying it as well, so that you feel part of something as you look to God. Now, of course, after that, there's a whole range of other ways in which you can pray. And in fact, we're having this conversation in April, and the new Archbishop of York, Archbishop Stephen, has just put out a book. It's called Prayer, and then it says where to start and how to keep going. So there's lots of little resources like that anybody could use. But what I wanted to do was to say you can approach it in all kinds of different ways, but start simply. Just start by saying the Lord's Prayer, Our Father in heaven, or Our Father who art in heaven, and think, I'm doing that together with 50,000 other people so that we can change the world in our region. And then the next one was about reading. Pray and read. And John Wesley, the famous Methodist founder, he said, what I want to be is a person of one book, namely the Bible. He wanted to be a Bible man. And of course, there are hundreds and thousands of books about Christianity and lots of impressive books that you can read. But Scripture is the basis of our faith and the bedrock. So what we said was, if you're called to pray and then you're called to read, make sure you read the Bible. Never mind how much you read. I don't mind if you read a verse a day, if that's all it is. If you do read a verse a day, you might be able to memorize it. That might be a good way. Or you might be the kind of person who enjoys reading a whole chapter every day. But read Scripture, because that's the bedrock of our faith. And then the third one was about learning. And what I said was, people can learn together. You don't have to be in groups or on Zoom or in person, although that's a great way to do it. And when I was a vicar, we always had small groups in the churches where I was. But if you just pick up a book reflecting on faith and read that, in a way, you're in a group, you and the author together. So learning is something that you do together. And the church is a gift of God to people so that we can learn together. Because otherwise, you're just going to go off. You're not going to know where you are. People wander off into the woods. Famously, if you get lost in the woods, you'll go around in circles in the end, because you don't know which way you're going. And the heart of learning then is learning in the church, learning together. So you're called to pray, to connect with God in simple and then deeper ways, to read Scripture and build on that foundation. And then to learn together, so that the praying and the reading are actually grounded in the way the world is. And that's the inner journey. And I was very keen to say, it's not that you do all that inner journey and then you go out. God calls us and sends us at the same time. And so when God sends us, what does he send us to do? And this was where I remembered what Bishop David and Bishop James had done in their years here, the bigger church and the bigger difference. He sends us to tell, that is to speak about the gospel and to speak about the Lord. And he sends us to serve, that is to help people and to see justice done. So we're sent to tell and we're sent to serve, but we're also sent to give. And that's not just about your money, although our diocese is fantastically generous. But it's about giving your life. If you're sent, then you'll find opportunities, and you don't have to look hard for them. In the Bible, 1 Peter 3, verse 15, it says, always be ready with an explanation if anybody asks you about the hope that you have. And so it's not about hitting other people over the head with the Bible, but it's being ready when you're asked to tell. And in your place of work or in your school or in the family, if people say, my dad used to say to me because I was a student and growing up at the time when the troubles in Northern Ireland were just beginning, and he would turn to me and he'd say, what are you going to do? What are we going to do about that? And I'd say to him, well, what are we going to do? And so you'd see something on the news, and then as Christians, we'd say to each other, what does the Bible tell us? What's the gospel tell us about that? And then we'd tell each other what we thought and then be able to share that. So it's not just about being pious. You can look at the news and you can tell what it means to love each other. Serving, it can be done in so many different ways. And in the diocese, we say, bring one friend. So tell one person about Jesus, do 10 things, whatever those 10 things are. Give money, give food to a food bank, or volunteer for something, or even get involved as a school governor, or join a political party and get stuck in to try and make things better for other people. So many different things you can do as you're sent to serve. And then when it comes to being sent to give, take it seriously that God has given us everything. And so we can try to give back to God what God has given us financially and in terms of our time and using our skills. But in the main, just to be the kind of person who's there for others. And then so you put all that together, and hopefully, as you're sent, you're doing things in the world and learning how to do them. And that comes back into, so if you're sent and you see particular need or difficult situations, you take that into your prayer. Or you read something in the Bible to say, what does God say about these things? Or you ask people in the church, or you try and find a book to say, how can we learn more about that? And at the same time, you're working out the best way to talk about God to friends and colleagues. You're working out the best way to serve and see justice done in your own community, wherever that is. And you're working out the best way to give your life. So the hope is, when all that's done together, it will make you a better disciple and help you walk closer with the Lord.
It's a great explanation there. We've known about this, but it's always good to have it coming.
Well, yeah. I mean, we tried to make it simple, but it's a lifetimes thing, And the thing, someone once said about prayer: you must pray as you can, and don't pray as you can't. In other words, don't think, oh my goodness, I wish I was some sort of superstar person of prayer. Because if you think that, you're never going to start. Yeah. And with the rule of life, with each of those 6 things, you can start. It's simple to start. And then it's as you live it out in your everyday life that things can go deeper. And that's my hope anyway for all of us in the diocese.
Yeah, that's right. As you know, I've been particularly strong about that, living out your faith in your
Absolutely.
24/7 discipleship and so on, setting God's people free. However, whatever term, everyday faith you want to use, and it fits in so perfectly there. The term, as you said, telling can be just what you do. It's not actually necessarily sometimes the words, but it's what you do. It's to quite often use it's a hackneyed phrase, I know, but walk the talk. That's what we need to make sure we do. We walk the talk. And not
and I strongly agree, David, about everyday faith, and about the fact that in the church we're called to be out there in the world. We're living our lives, doing our jobs, connecting with our families and our friends, playing our sport, whatever it happens to be. And people are always watching us. Yeah. And when people get ordained, I say to them, it's as if you're like a cup that's full up, but what you're full of is messages. And if you move in any direction, messages slop over the edge, and people will be watching you, especially if they know you're a Christian, to see, how does this person live their life, and that that shouldn't make us inhibited about anything, but it does mean that the way you live. When I do confirmations sometimes with young people, I tell a story about which I was told about someone who. This was a church leader, but his sister worked in an office, and she was a Christian, and the guy met his sister's boss at a party, and the boss didn't know that it was her brother, so he thought, find out about my sister now. We can see what she's really like. And so he said, oh well, what do you make of her then? What's she like? And the guy said, she's great. She's helpful at work. She's full of fun. She'll stop on late if it needs to be done. But sometimes, he said, this is what I say to the children in confirmation. So sometimes it's as if she's on another planet. In other words, sometimes you can tell that she lives her life by values that are different from the values of the world. So, whether that's refusing to joke about disabled people, perhaps, or whether it's refusing to get involved in the kind of, pinching paper clips, the kind of tiny things that nobody ever sees to be a problem. But suddenly, as you know this person, you think she's human, she's full of fun, but she's got values that really matter. And when you say, you don't have to name the name of Jesus all the time, because by the messages that you give out, you're commending the gospel. That's the kind of thing I think that we mean.
Yeah, absolutely, completely, obviously agree. As you know, my views on that sort of thing, really. Well, I think we've more or less come to the end of our time there. We didn't want to take up too much of your time. I could talk to you forever, actually, about lots of different aspects of what happens here in Liverpool as well. There's so many different other projects, but we haven't got time to do all that. But perhaps another time we could expand a little bit further, but who knows? So I'd like to say a really big thank you for you doing that and giving that. I'm sure it'll be great for us to put that out in our church. We are trying to do quite a lot of things to do with the rule of life. We've been pushing. In fact, Alan's been just this week. We do a thought for the day since COVID. We do a thought for the day, and has been talking about very much the HTB Bible in 1 year, and encouraging people to do that. And there are lots. We know there are lots of other ones, but that's and we're getting a lot of positive support.
Yeah.
So, and also we obviously want to do a few practical things.
It's really great. And I regret one of the tough things for me about this last year is that I've not been able to visit the churches, because I've always loved it when I've come to your church and to see the different communities that you've got in your different services and things. And I please do pass on to them my love and very best wishes, and really looking forward to when we'll be able to meet again in person. But every blessing, and thanks again for asking me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.